Book 1. Francis the Church Builder. Chapter 1. The Convalescent. There awoke one morning in Assisi a young man who was just recovering from a severe illness. It was 700 years ago. The hour was an early one. The window blinds were not yet opened. Out of doors the day's business was in full blast. The bells for Mass had long ago rung out from St. Maria del Vescovado, which lay almost under the windows. The strong morning light streamed in through the crack where the window blinds met. The young man knew it all so well. One morning after another, the long weeks of his convalescence had passed thus. Soon his mother would come in and draw the shutters aside, and the light would enter in dazzling brightness. Then he would get his morning draught, and his bed would be made over. He used to lie on one side of the wide bed, while the other was made up for him. And so he would lie there, tired but at peace, and look out on the blue, cloudless autumn sky, listening to the splashing on the stones of the street as the people of the neighborhood threw their waste water out of the windows. As the forenoon advanced, the rays of the sun began to come in, first along the high wall of the window alcove, then right across the brick floor of the room. And when they approached the bed, it was time to take the midday meal. After midday the blinds were again closed, and he took his siesta in the quiet, comfortable obscurity of the room. Then he awoke, and the blinds were again thrown open to admit the light. The sun had left the window, but if he raised himself up in the bed, he could see the mountains under a blue veil on the other side of the plain, and soon the crimson evening red of the late autumn day burned in the western sky. As the darkness quickly fell, he heard the noise of sheep, which were driven bleating into the stable, and of peasants and peasant girls who sang on their way home from the fields. They were the wonderful, heart-gripping folk songs of Umbria which the invalid heard, the songs which even today are in the people's mouths, and whose slow, wonderfully melancholy tones fill the soul with sadness, till it is ready to burst with helpless longing and melancholy. At last the songs ceased, and it was night. Over the distant mountains gleamed a single bright star. When that showed itself, it was time to close the shutters and to light the night lamp, the lamp which in the long nights of fever had constantly burned through the long hours of his uneasy dreams. Today there was to be a change. Today at last he was to have permission to leave his bed. How glad he was to go into the other rooms, to see and touch all the things he had so long missed, and had been so near losing forever. He must even venture down into the business offices, see the people come and do business, see the clerks measure the good Tuscan cloth with their yardsticks, and draw in the bright ringing coins. Just as the young man was busy with these dreams, the door opened. As on every morning of his illness, it was his mother who entered. As she threw the shutters aside, he saw that she carried, as she brought his morning meal, a suit of man's clothes over her arms. "I have had a new suit of clothes made for you, my Francis," she said, as she laid them down at the foot of the bed. And as he finished his meal, she sat down by the window while he dressed himself. "What a lovely morning it is," she said, almost as if she were talking to herself. "How brightly the sun shines. I see all the houses over in Betona so clearly, although there is the whole extent of the broad plain between us, and out in the middle of the green vineyards Isola Romanesca lies like an island in a lake. And smoke is rising straight up from all the chimneys, as if from a censer in a church. Ah, it seems to me, my Francis, that on such a morning as this, heaven and earth are as beautiful as a church on a feast day, and that all creatures praise, love, and thank God." To these words Francis gave no answer but silence. But a moment later he broke out, as he ceased his dressing, "How weak I am!" His mother changed the current of her remarks and their tone. "It is always so when one has been sick," she said brightly. "As long as you lie in bed you think that you can do anything, but as soon as you get your feet from under the covers you find that it is different. I know this from my own experience, and therefore I had the foresight to bring a stick for you." And she went to the door and brought in a beautiful polished stick with an ivory handle. Soon after the mother and son together left the sick room. Some time passed before Francis could venture to go out of his home alone. He and his mother had visited all the rooms. They had been down in the shop, where the clerks had greeted them with a hearty and delighted "Good morning, Madonna Pica. Good morning, and welcome back, Signorino Francesco." But Francis had to go further than through rooms and shop, further than through the house. He must go out and greet the fields and vineyards, greet the open heaven, and look far over the wide fertile plain. And now he stood outside the city gate, on the road which goes to Foligno, along the foot of Monte Subiaco. Here he stood, supported by his stick, and looked out. Directly in front of him was a vineyard. The vines were festooned from tree to tree. Heavy blue branches hung under the broad leaves. Soon it will be the grape harvest and the beautiful time of wine pressing. Further down the slope were the olive groves that extended over the plain and covered it with a silver gray veil. Here and there appeared the white buildings and farmhouses under a veil of mist, which now towards midday began to rise out of the earth. The most distant buildings seemed hardly larger than little white stones. Francis saw it all, yet not as he should have seen it. That excess of delight with which the sight of the landscape's bright colors and of the mountain's fine outline against the clear sky formerly affected him, was missing. It was as if the heart which formerly had beaten so young and strongly in his breast had suddenly grown old. It seemed to him as if he never again could enjoy anything. He felt too hot in the sun, and retreated to the shadow of a wall. His knees were too weak to let him go down the hill. He also was hungry, and caught himself dreaming of a good dinner and of a glass of wine. And like a shudder the sensation went through him that his youth was gone, that the things which he had believed would constantly give him peace would now give him no joy, that all that he had thought to be a treasure which never could be taken from him, the sunshine, the blue heaven, the green fields, all that he in his convalescent's weary days had so bitterly longed for, like an exiled king for his kingdom, that all this in his hands was now worthless, smoldering, and going to ashes, like the palms of Palm Sunday burned and reduced to the ashes which the priest on Ash Wednesday puts upon the heads of the faithful, with the sad and truthful words, "Remember, man, of dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return." It was all dust, dust and nothing but dust, and ashes, death and judgment, mortality and vanity. All was vanity. Francis stood there a long time and looked into space. It was as though he saw the future blossoming before his eyes. Slowly he turned away, and leaning heavily on his stick, went back to Assisi. For him the day was come of which the Lord spoke to the prophet, "I will spread thy path with thorns." The day when a mysterious hand writes words of death and corruption on the walls of the feast chamber. But like all who are in the first steps of their conversion, the young man immediately thought as much of the failings of others as of his own. For as he saw the change that had taken place in himself, his thoughts were directed to his friends with whom he had so often stood there and admired the beautiful view. How foolish they are that they love perishable things, he thought within himself, with a sort of feeling of superiority, as he went back to the city gate. End of Book 1, Chapter 1.